There's a saying that I always loved, and that is, wounding happens in relationship and healing happens in relationship. It always felt so hopeful to me, like I could get a do-over. And as someone who grew up in an alcoholic home, a dysfunctional, chaotic, narcissistic family system, I needed a do-over. My name is Dr. Ingrid Clayton. I'm a clinical psychologist, a trauma therapist, and a trauma survivor. My hope with this channel is to explore things like trauma reenactment, trauma responses, because I believe that we can really heal through shared experience. But I realize now that for many years, what I believed is that that do-over had to happen either in relationship to the people that created the original wounding or people who kind of represented those personality types or particular issues. It was sort of like I was trying to work out a math problem, like I was trying to solve for X, and I needed to have the same ingredients, me, the dynamic, and then finally kind of breaking through to the other side. I kept finding myself in the same relationship with a different face, right? I wasn't choosing it. In fact, I was consciously trying not to choose it. I was going to therapy. I was going to 12-step programs. I was like, why do I keep ending up in the same dysfunctional relationships with unavailable partners, lying, abusive, manipulating, actively addicted partners? I couldn't figure it out. So a part of me thought, maybe, just maybe, it's about coming together with someone who maybe has those qualities, because here I am again, but the two of us, if we sort of commit to doing it differently, we're gonna wrestle through this thing and come to the other side together where we're both more healed and happy, and in a better relationship, we will have survived this dynamic together, which is really gonna cement the relationship. This is genuinely what I thought, what I believed. It was as though I thought we were going to break the spell, right? The spell had to be broken. I knew that. And I couldn't do it by myself, right? Wounding happens in relationship. Healing happens in relationship. So I thought, okay, it's either my parents are going to right the wrongs, they're going to admit what happened, they're going to stop scapegoating me for it, or it's going to happen by someone being unavailable, but then being available, by someone being actively addicted, but maybe choosing me over the substance, right? These various scenarios that I found myself in. It was like, okay, this is how it's going to happen. In fact, there were two things that were actually happening in my life over and over for decades. One is that what I was actually doing was called trauma reenactment. Many traumatized people will unconsciously expose themselves to situations that remind them of their original trauma in an attempt to have a different outcome. Unfortunately, for most folks, just like me, we don't get a better outcome. We get more wounds, more shame. We repeat the dynamic, which really confirms this idea that, I'm not lovable, I'm not worth it, right? Because that's the spell that I'm trying to break. If I can find an unavailable person who originally doesn't want to choose me, sort of like my parents, and then they swing around and choose me, it's like, oh, right? That's going to be the thing. I can't just do it myself, just choosing myself. It has to be in relationship. And the necessary ingredient was to start with the original wounding place. The second thing that was actually happening every time I was involved in this trauma reenactment is I never had a partner who genuinely wanted to change with me, right? I just wanted them to change. They were not invested in this process. I tried to convince them. I thought I was doing a good job convincing them of why they would want to change this dynamic, but let me tell you how many times it worked. 0 times. So my partners were just being who they were, right? They even flat out told me half the time, I'm not interested in a relationship. I don't want a commitment. I don't want to get married. I don't want kids. And I was like, I'm feeling a little excited, right? Because the old dynamic was ignited in me. my mind was saying, oh man, I don't think this is a good idea. Like, they're flat out telling me they don't want the same things as me. But my body was responding, right? Because trauma lives in the nervous system. It's in our body. It speaks a different language. It has a mind of its own. It's not asking my opinion like, Ingrid, what do you think about this thing? It's like, oh, here we go. This is familiar. I know how to do this thing. Buckle in. Like, this is when we start the fawning trauma response. I'm going to abandon myself in order to show up for you. That's the crux of the fawning trauma response. It's the heartbeat of codependency. I'm going to abandon myself and take care of you, because if I do a good job, if I meet your needs enough, if I'm, mirroring and matching and intuiting what you need enough, you're going to eventually show up for me, right? Like, that's how it's going to be reciprocal, right? We end up abandoning ourselves and staying there. Okay, so you're wondering, now what? Here's the thing. Where I mistook that original idea of wounding happens in relationship, healing happens in relationship. Healing is not going to happen in a toxic relationship. Where healing, in my experience, can happen is in our relationship to ourselves. The thing that I was kind of repulsed by, to be honest. I always felt like, self-love, like that's like a placebo. Like, if no one else can really love me, loving myself is never going to do it. I could tell that was like round peg, square hole, is what it felt like to me. But what I didn't understand is that loving myself in this context meant that when I started to recognize unavailability, active addiction, manipulation, or lying, those were signs that I was meant to walk away. That self-love meant I will not abandon myself. I will not tolerate this bad behavior. I will not look at it as a problem for me to solve, because it isn't. There's this other saying that goes hand in hand with these ideas, which is that red flags don't look like red flags when they feel like home. So a lot of the time, I didn't know that these things were red flags, but because I had done the same thing, this trauma reenactment over and over and over, I could look back at my history and go, okay, let's see, what are the things that I keep repeating, right? So maybe I couldn't see them in advance, but I could start to see them in hindsight. And I literally made a list. All right, what are the things that that are deal breakers? I didn't even call them red flags. It's like, what are my deal breakers, right? Someone who, can't get a job, won't make a living, isn't interested in showing up for themselves. Deal breaker, someone who's actively addicted, not interested in, getting sober or clean or whatever the thing is, not going to do it. All of these things, I made a list. And then I could see it even just a little more clearly when it cropped up in the future. It was like I suddenly had the superpower of being able to see red flags. And then I had to trust. If this feels familiar, even if it gives me that excitement feeling that I thought was chemistry, I thought was healthy chemistry anyway, I thought was, the makings of relationship. What it actually was trauma reenactment. What it actually was reminiscent of trauma bonding. The highs and lows of that hormonal chemical thing that happens when we're in an abusive relationship, where there's a whole lot of lows, and then every now and then they show up. They give you great gifts, particularly in a narcissistic relationship. You get that love bomb, that attention, that thing that tells you, you're so special, it's you, you're my everything. And now the person who was treating us like this has saved us from that awful existence. For me growing up, it was the silent treatment, things of that nature. Now I'm special, and the abuser is the one that has dubbed me so, and so now I need them, right? The brain literally associates the abuser with safety now, and it shuts off long-term memory of everything that happened before that moment. So I was wired for this trauma bonding experience that is often mistaken for love, in my childhood. So a part of my trauma reenactment was looking for that again, this trauma bonding, hoping that one day I'm going to get someone that just wants to stay up here in the highs. Again, it never, ever happened. So when I could see that that cycle was starting, even in the like, oh, this feels exciting, it feels like there's potential feels exciting, it's like, not for me, not for me. And I will tell you that when I met my now husband, I was sitting across the table from him having the most lovely conversation, so engaging. He was so kind, he was so present, he was real. He was like a real person in front of me. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Maybe we're just meant to be friends. Because I had this idea that trauma bonding kind of crazy chemistry was healthy chemistry. And what I had to learn was that this more even, sustainable, healthy attraction felt night and day different. So different that my first thought was, oh, maybe we're meant to be friends. But I want to keep spending time with him, but I want to see him again. And fortunately, I had enough people in my life that were like, yeah, Ingrid, this is probably a good thing. And I was like, okay, good, because it feels good. It just feels so different that I kept showing up and getting to know healthy love. And now it's the healthiest, longest relationship I've had of my life. The long story short is I had to stop choosing unavailable people over me, and I just had to choose me. The healing had to happen in this relationship. Then more healing could happen with a healthy partner, but it wasn't that do-over feeling, that it wasn't that like we're gonna go from this to this, we're gonna move the needle that far. It was in, oh, we're showing up every day. Oh, there's consistency here. Oh, I can trust you. Oh, it doesn't feel like the bottom's going to fall out. It was getting accustomed to that kind of a relationship where healing was happening, because every day was like a new experience that I hadn't had before. But I had to do this work of choosing me, even just a little bit first. If you like what I've had to say, want to hear more, be sure to do all the things. Like, subscribe, share. If healing happens in relationship, we can do it in relationship to one another, survivor to survivor. I'm also the author of a new memoir, Believing Me, Healing from Narcissistic Abuse and Complex Trauma. It's where I really flesh out my lived experience of these things. And a lot of folks are finding that by reading Believing Me, they're also believing themselves, their own story, what it did to them, and their capacity to heal. I hope that you find the same. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching.